showing everything. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us on a little bit of chat after the Ignite keynote that we just had. See, quite a long keynote, going a little bit longer than I think any of us probably expected. So for those of you who I don't know, I'm Mike Letschin. I'm the Director of Technical Advocacy at Cohesity, and M. Letschin on Twitter, for those of you who follow on there. And I am joined by a couple colleagues and friends here as well. So let me let them introduce themselves real quick. So Theresa, why don't you kick it off first?
Yeah, so Mike and I are colleagues. I work at Cohesity. I'm Theresa Miller. You can find me on Twitter at 24/7 IT Connect. And for those of you who know me from the community, I am a Microsoft MVP, Citrix CTP, and vExpert. Excited for today's talk. I won't totally spill the beans, although I think you got some context. You know, we have a couple data protection geeks here, so we may talk a little bit about that, but I'll go ahead and pass it over to Brian for some intros, and then we'll get started.
Cool. Thanks, Theresa. Yeah, so my name is Brian Knudsen. Like Mike said, been friends for years in the VMware community, been a vExpert. And so I'm here kind of having been doing the data protection thing, both as a customer, as a VAR, slinging solutions from several different providers, and now as a provider myself. Been doing the data protection thing for a while. Mike and I are colleagues in the regard of opening acts, which we'll be doing on these same channels here next week.
Yeah, so I think that's so for those of you who also follow VMworld and know opening acts and VM Underground, very similar thing. Watch it off of, you can do it off of Discord for the viewing parties there, and as well as an entire opening acts channel for you to watch. So a little commercial there, but we'll move on. So staying on the topic today. So before we jump into kind of some questions about the truth about data protection, I think it's kind of pertinent to talk about some of the things we heard in the keynote, since we have a few minutes right after it. I know we each got to follow a little bit. And for those who didn't really make the keynote, maybe you're watching this afterwards on it. Theresa, I know there were a couple of things that you found that were helpful to kind of be able to follow, because some of the stuff early, when they started kicking that off, I would say before, right around the flight simulator demo, it was, hey, we're going to show you 7,000 things in about 4 minutes. So it was a little hard to follow what was going on, I think, for some people. So what were those couple? You had a couple things. Why don't you kind of give us a heads up on what those are? I'll toss them up on the bottom as you're telling us.
Yeah, that would be great if you could share them. So the first one is the Ignite Book of News. It is something that does go out every year. It really is a nice recap of all the various things that you're going to see as Ignite is ongoing, including a lot of that keynote stuff. I know personally sitting and watching that whole keynote wasn't possible, right? Where you have meetings and things to get to. So this resource comes in really handy. And then the second one I found today, Michael also put up there. I have no idea who Rencore.com is, but they were doing a really fantastic play-by-play recap with some screenshots and some summaries of the whole keynote. So you get the really abbreviated version of it to take a look at. So make sure if you didn't catch it all, like I don't think most of us did, these are great resources for you.
So I think one of the things that we can't do, obviously, that they were able to do there is we're obviously not doing this on an 85-inch Surface Hub. So, which would have been nice. I don't know about you guys, but I don't even know, where would you put an 85-inch? Do you have space somewhere to put an 85-inch screen in your house? Brian's looking around debating right now.
Yeah, maybe in my movie room downstairs.
My entire wall in my office.
Yeah, I think that's about what would happen here. There'd be some reorganization in a significant way.
What was there was a commercial about that, the guy that regrets that people did. It was the 100-inch screen that he put in his 100-square-foot apartment. Now his eyes hurt, his shoulders hurt, his neck hurt. He couldn't figure. I feel like that's what an 85-inch Surface would do to me in most places in my house. So if they made it waterproof, that would be awesome, though, to have outside.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a nice touch. But
be the popular spot in the neighborhood.
Outside of kind of cool gadgetry, before we get into some of data protection questions, Brian, I'm going to go to you. Was there something that you saw during the keynote that you thought was just kind of jumped out, was a cool change, something cool they released, something new?
I don't know that I would pick any one particular thing in that regard. I mean, it always blows me away the sheer amount of stuff that they talk about. Just because there is just so much Microsoft does. I get that from AWS and from Google as well. When they have these kind of keynotes, it's like, how do you fit everything in for everybody that needs different things? Because there's a chunk of it was all developer focused. Some of it, and like Theresa, I had other meetings I was kind of in and out of it. But most of what I caught was the analytics BI dynamic side of it, and I'm like, okay, not something I've ever focused on. Once upon a time, a long time ago, I installed it into our environment when we were testing different platforms in that regard. So yeah, that I guess that's what I would call out, is just the sheer amount of stuff that they have, and keynotes never give us the depth that we really want, just because of that, if nothing else.
So, I mean, I think that's definitely the case. There were so many different things. We didn't get the deep dive on some of the things. When you look at kind of the higher level on some of the things, you look at on the very beginning of saying it was going to be wrapped around the equation of tech intensity. So it's tech adoption times tech capability to the power of trust. And I was like, well, it's a cool equation. Mm-hmm. I feel like it was a Gartner equation because it didn't actually tell me anything. But I do think that the speed of the adoption on things. And Brian, I don't know if you're hitting your mic or what. We're getting some garble on your mic, getting a lot of scratchiness on your side right now. Okay. So let me down my video. So on that, Theresa, was there something that you saw that you thought really kind of jumped out for you?
So I have a short list.
We got time. I mean, short.
But I'm not going to dive deep into anything, but there are some things that I'm going to just go back and take a closer look at. So Azure Orbital, I just the cool factor of it, the fact that they're doing stuff with space and kind of competing with another company that starts with A. In that area, I think I want to go back and learn a little bit more. Does that apply to my day job? Heck no. That's more of a curiosity thing. Other things that I think are pretty interesting. So the whole Azure VMware element, being able to basically manage your VMware environments right in Azure, I think was pretty cool. Azure Migration Program has my curiosity piqued because we do kind of play in that space. So that's probably more of a competitive curiosity. And then one more thing, just more of a cool factor, Teams has their together mode where you and I can be sitting in chairs meeting instead of being divided by these little blocker walls. This is true.
We can, but we may also look like we're sitting at the kids' table. So I think for a while, everyone in it looked like they were here for everything. And you're like,
in an auditorium.
Maybe, but I mean, it was a nice, it's a nice change. I thought it was interesting. They tried to highlight breakout rooms. Basically, I'm like, okay, I've been able to do breakout rooms.
I know.
With a lot of things for a while. So I didn't know if that really, that one didn't bug me, but the setup on Teams, I think, was a nice touch. For me, it was the Orbital stuff. I thought the capability of what they potentially could do with being able to process things in Azure, not having to send data all the way back from the moon or from Mars or from wherever, I think it could just exponentially change how quickly we can get data processed. Then the question, and this is my cool segue, turns into how do we deal with that data once it's there? How do we deal with all this extra data we're talking about that's sitting out in Azure? And I think I'm going to start with you, Theresa, and maybe with what are some of those data protection challenges that you've seen with cloud infrastructures? I mean, they're talking about all sorts of other changes, but even just in history, what are those things now that you've seen?
Yeah, so that's a great question and a great segue. So some of the things that stand out to me is that a lot of enterprises have they have like their on-prem data, they have their cloud data, and they might even have other clouds. So they've got multi-cloud. So they have data everywhere. So you're dealing with fragmented data, but you're also dealing with separate solutions to protect all of that data. And so I think that is, I mean, there are many different elements, but those are some of the big ones that I would call out as being able to manage that in from a single solution, regardless of the cloud, regardless of where the data is, can really simplify things for your administrators. And I hear this all the time. It's a big challenge for companies. So why not do it from one place? You don't get that. You don't get that with the separate solutions today.
So Brian, you deal with cloud on a pretty much daily basis on it. Where do you see that some of those challenges come into play?
Yeah, I mean, the first challenge is oftentimes just making sure people realize that the data that goes into the cloud isn't just magically protected. There's a lot of times people just go to the cloud and assume, hey, I put it in Dropbox, so now it's safe. It's safe forever. It's not. You always want to save it in two different places. It may be highly available. That doesn't mean it's resilient to actual loss. They announced some improvements around that. Is it going to be full-fledged for what everybody needs? No, probably not. I definitely see kind of what Theresa was talking about with multiple places where people have data and trying to protect it all is difficult. It's definitely a challenge because you've got data flying everywhere. I mean, it's hard to manage to begin with, much less backing up, because now you've doubled the places that things are going to be at. There's customers that have challenges getting to the data, whether that's getting data offsite or getting to their data when they're on site and their data is offsite, just because of bandwidth issues. But I live in the center of the country, and that's still a major issue around here. So it's a matter, the tracking of it is a big problem. The actually making sure that you're protecting it is a big problem. And as you start going, not just beyond continents and cities, you start talking about some of this global stuff they're talking about and going into space. I can't imagine how much of an exponential jump that's going to be for a lot of customers.
So I think as we look at all the different places, as we talked about, it's how do we start kind of working towards solving that problem of the silos that we deal with both in the cloud, but on-prem as well, meeting and covering SLAs that are being asked for, and at service providers, that's even a bigger deal, and recovering from those SLAs, especially in the cloud. Now, I think because we don't have the control over it in the cloud, how much harder is that for us to start to get rid of those silos first, and then speed recovery? I didn't hear anything about that I felt was going to dramatically help that today. Did you guys?
I personally did not. I think that's interesting, right? Because so let's talk about a couple different elements. So like M365, there's no actual true data protection option, right? There's policies, you can legal hold things. So there's no guarantees on recovery times if you choose to use those as backup, which aren't even really backup. And then if you shift gears over to Azure, so in terms of Azure, sometimes, use a solution in Azure, for example, Microsoft does offer something. If you turned it on, remember, Brian, you're totally right. It's not enabled by default. I didn't see any changes coming to any SLAs that could potentially be offered there, as well as we just kind of look at these as separate solutions, right? So I'm not sure that we'll see any changes, but there are things that people should be, and enterprises should be thinking about. So how fast am I going to get my data back if something really bad happens that I wasn't expecting?
So with that being the case, they obviously offer some things like high availability, though. So if I think a lot of people look at it and go, well, I have high availability, so I'm okay. I mean, why would people out there care? Why does it matter between what we're talking about on data protection versus high availability?
Yeah, that one kind of hits hard because, you know, part of being in a data protection company, you know, we've all been banging the drums on ransomware. We've all been banging the drums on accidental deletion and internal threats. So there's definitely places where just having it available isn't good enough. It's the potential of data to be corrupted, to be accidentally or purposely removed, that you need to go back to just the traditional restore that we're all used to in the past. It's not just about it being out there and in a place that it's going to be able to fail over super easily.
I would agree with that totally. That no one should rely on high availability for data protection, because even if it's a second spinning copy of that data, even with some kind of lag, you're still going to run into some scenario where you're just not going to be able to get back what you need. And that's where data protection really comes in. So I think, Mike, you sounded like you might be, maybe you had some additional thoughts on this or had a different place to go, but I just felt that was important to share.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you guys. I think a lot of people look at high availability and say, to me, high availability is great to keep things running when things are perfect. Mm-hmm. Data protection is for when things aren't perfect. And like high availability is having two cars in the driveway so I can go drive the other car when one breaks down.
Right.
Insurance on the one car is my data protection. Mm-hmm. Or both cars, hopefully. Don't drive without insurance. That would be bad. I don't recommend that. So I think that's really where it comes down to, though, is they can't have, say, it has to stay up all the time. That it's the challenge between people saying business continuity and disaster recovery. Business continuity lets me keep going. That's fine. That's great. I need to do that. But it doesn't necessarily always help me to recover from a disaster, I think. And they're two different terms that get interplayed too often.
Yeah.
Brian, it sounds like you've got something on that, because I am curious on what you guys think the expectation should be for data management. What should we be expecting for data management, data protection, and are we getting it right now?
No, I like that you threw out the business continuity, disaster recovery difference, because, you know, business continuity is how do we plan to keep our business going when something happens, and that could be, you know, there's asbestos found in the building and we have to evacuate the people, but the data center is just fine. It could be that, you know, a fire happened and we need to get our data out of the data center that's on site. It could be that ransomware broke out and we need to shut down certain services for a short time so that we can clean it out. And one of those solutions for cleaning it out is restoring those backups. You know, having two versions that are load balanced don't do you any good if they're both, you know, get encrypted. So it's business continuity is definitely a umbrella across many different things that need to be addressed. And, you know, disaster recovery, high availability is another one. You know, we don't want that virtual machine to go down, so what do? We throw up a +1 infrastructure so that everything can fail over if one fails. It could be, you know, individual file gets deleted, we need to be able to restore it from somewhere. So yeah, it's important to consider every level of disaster, both people and technology wise.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, Theresa, do you have any other thoughts on kind of what aren't we getting on what we should on today for data management, data protection? What more should we expect?
Yeah. So first, I'm glad, Brian, you called out those differences, because they are different. But going beyond that, in terms of expecting more from data management, I think, you know, when you think about the earlier days of just backing up your systems, it really was that you were buying a solution that would back up. People didn't even test their backups, so you kind of hoped you'd get a recovery. I mean, that's in the early days, right? And so now I think we expect our backup solution to be able to recover. A lot of enterprises do testing now. But in terms of being able to do more, if you're already backing up that data anyways, and you have access to that data, why can't you use it for other things? Like, one of the use cases I love is dev test, because I've struggled so many times over the years to get the infrastructure, because if I wanted to stand up a separate dev test environment for my entire enterprise, it cost a lot of money. And so being able to potentially like take that backup and spin it up into a machine that I can like test updates against, or I can do development against, I think we should expect that. I think archiving is another one. Being able to do long-term retention right away from our backups and not having to like truck it off site and hope the truck gets there, and then, you know, I need that data for recovery because it's off on tape somewhere, and it comes back 24 hours later. When we were talking about SLAs, who wants to wait 24 hours to get something back anymore? We have higher expectations now, and I think we're probably all a little too patient to wait 24 hours to get something back. So those are some of the use cases that jump out at me.
Yeah, I think we definitely are. So we're right about at that 20 minutes that we wanted to do. So I think one of the things that I want to wrap up with is I started with that equation that they put out there of tech adoption times the tech capability. And I think one of the things we're seeing is the capability is getting there. So now it's how do we help with the adoption and the trust level of companies like what we saw from Microsoft doing it, what we've seen obviously from what Cohesity has been able to do over the years. The trust is starting to get there and more. So I think we'll start to see more adoption, and then even better of the tech intensity as they put out because of those increases in it. So thank you, Theresa. Thank you, Brian, for joining me both. And on that, we will toss it back to the chat in the Discord channel. People can continue. So thanks, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.